The saddest kind of loneliness is not having nobody around you. It is having everything except someone to share it with. Every evening at exactly 6 o'clock, Jonathan Reed stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse and watched the city glow beneath him. 47 floors below, thousands of people hurried through crowded sidewalks, stepped into restaurants, greeted loved ones, and returned to homes filled with conversation. From this height, their lives looked like streams of light flowing through the heart of New York. Jonathan watched them every night. He never joined them. At 58 years old, he was one of the most successful real estate developers in America. His company owned luxury buildings across the country. Business magazines called him visionary. Financial networks invited him for interviews. Industry leaders sought his advice. Yet every evening ended the same way. The penthouse doors closed behind him. Silence greeted him. The vast residence overlooking Central Park contained 5 bedrooms, a private library, an indoor garden, and artwork worth millions of dollars. It also contained only one person. 25 years earlier, Jonathan had made a decision that quietly changed the course of his life. After a painful chapter he rarely discussed, he stopped searching for love. At first, he told himself it was temporary. Then 1 year became 5. 5 became 10. Eventually, solitude transformed into routine. The world assumed he preferred it that way. The truth was more complicated. Some wounds did not disappear. They simply learned how to hide beneath success. That evening, a gentle rain tapped against the glass while the city lights shimmered through the storm. Jonathan loosened his tie and placed a folder on the kitchen counter. Another successful acquisition. Another profitable quarter. Another achievement that should have felt meaningful. Instead, he found himself staring at an empty chair beside the dining table. The chair had remained empty for so many years that nobody questioned it anymore. Not his colleagues. Not his friends. Not even Jonathan himself. Yet tonight something about it felt different. Across the city, Maya Brooks finished her final shift of the day. At 42, she moved through life with a quiet grace that often went unnoticed. She worked as part of the cleaning staff assigned to one of Jonathan's luxury residential properties. Most residents barely looked at her. Some never learned her name. Maya never seemed bothered by it. She greeted people warmly, helped whenever she could, and carried herself with a calm dignity that came from surviving difficult years without losing kindness. As she organized supplies inside a maintenance room, she glanced at a framed photograph she carried in her bag. It showed her and her daughter several years earlier, both smiling beneath summer sunlight. The picture reminded her why she kept moving forward, why she kept believing that even ordinary days mattered. The following morning, Jonathan entered the lobby of his flagship building shortly after 7. The marble floors gleamed beneath golden lights. Employees hurried through their routines. Residents crossed the lobby carrying coffee cups and briefcases. Everything appeared exactly as it always did. Then he noticed someone arranging fresh flowers near the reception desk. A woman in a simple navy work uniform carefully adjusted each stem as though beauty deserved attention, even in the smallest details. For reasons he could not explain, Jonathan slowed his pace. Maya stepped back to admire the arrangement. A small smile appeared on her face. It was genuine, unhurried, the kind of smile people wore when nobody was watching. Jonathan found himself watching anyway. Neither of them knew it yet, but after 25 years of merely existing, Jonathan Reed was about to meet the person who would teach him how to live again. The following week unfolded with the same predictable rhythm that had defined Jonathan Reed's life for years, yet something subtle had changed. Every morning he entered the lobby of Reed Tower with the same measured pace, greeted the same employees, and reviewed the same reports waiting in his office. But now, almost without realizing it, he found himself looking toward the reception area first. Maya Brooks was usually there before sunrise, moving quietly through the lobby with her cleaning cart, arranging flowers, wiping polished surfaces, and bringing order to spaces most people rushed through without noticing. What surprised Jonathan was not her work ethic. It was the way she seemed to transform ordinary moments. One morning he watched her stop to help an elderly resident struggling with several shopping bags. Another day she spent 5 minutes reassuring a nervous young intern who had accidentally spilled coffee near the front desk. She never appeared rushed, never appeared annoyed. She treated every person with the same kindness. Most people thanked her briefly and moved on. Jonathan noticed because nobody had treated him that way in a very long time. One rainy Thursday morning, he arrived earlier than usual. The lobby was nearly empty. Outside, gray clouds covered Manhattan, while steady rain streaked down the enormous glass windows. Maya stood near a large floral arrangement, replacing several wilted white lilies with fresh ones. For a moment, Jonathan simply observed. The care she gave to such a small task seemed strangely remarkable. Finally, he approached. Maya looked up and offered the same warm smile she gave everyone. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Jonathan paused. Most people addressed him with nervous respect or exaggerated enthusiasm. Maya sounded neither intimidated nor impressed. Just sincere. "Good morning," he replied. The conversation should have ended there. Usually it did. Yet Jonathan remained standing beside the flowers. They looked different today. Maya glanced toward the arrangement. The lilies were fading. "I thought the lobby deserved something brighter." Jonathan studied the fresh flowers. Most people would never notice. Maya laughed softly. "Maybe. But sometimes the little things make a place feel more welcoming." Her words lingered with him long after he entered the elevator. Throughout the day, he found himself thinking about them. The little things. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped paying attention to them. His world had become dominated by contracts, acquisitions, and quarterly projections. Success measured in numbers rather than moments. That evening, after returning to his penthouse, Jonathan walked through the quiet rooms carrying a cup of coffee. The city lights sparkled beyond the windows. The familiar silence surrounded him. Yet for the first time, he wondered whether silence and peace were truly the same thing. Across town, Maya sat at a small kitchen table in her apartment reviewing bills while speaking with her daughter on the phone. Their conversation was filled with laughter, advice, and affection. When the call ended, Maya smiled at the family photograph resting nearby. Life had not always been easy, but she remained grateful for what mattered most. The next morning, Jonathan entered the lobby once again. Before he could continue toward the elevators, he noticed something unusual. A small framed photograph had fallen from a shelf near one of the decorative displays. Maya had picked it up and was carefully examining the image to determine where it belonged. Jonathan froze the moment he saw the photograph, because it was not part of the lobby decoration at all. It was a picture from his own past. And somehow, after 25 years, a memory he had spent decades avoiding was about to return. Jonathan stopped in the middle of the lobby as though time itself had paused. Around him, residents continued crossing the marble floor, elevators opened and closed, and quiet conversations drifted through the air. Yet all he could see was the photograph resting in Maya's hands. The simple silver frame contained an image he had not looked at in more than 2 decades. A younger version of himself stood beside a woman beneath a summer sky, both smiling at a future that once seemed certain. Maya immediately noticed the change in his expression. "I am sorry," she said gently. "I found it near the display shelf. I was trying to figure out where it belonged." Jonathan approached slowly and accepted the frame. His fingers tightened slightly around the edge. For several moments, he simply stared at the image. The years separating him from that moment suddenly felt much shorter. "Thank you," he said quietly. Maya nodded, sensing there was a story behind the photograph. She did not ask questions. That small act of respect touched Jonathan more than he expected. Most people would have been curious. Maya simply returned to her work. As Jonathan stepped into the elevator, he glanced back once. She was already arranging fresh flowers again, focused on making the lobby a little brighter than she found it. The elevator doors closed, but the image remained in his thoughts. Later that afternoon, Jonathan sat alone in his office overlooking Manhattan. The photograph rested on his desk beside stacks of contracts and financial reports. For years, he had hidden it away inside a storage box, convinced that leaving the past untouched was easier than revisiting it. Yet seeing it again had awakened memories he thought were gone. Memories of dreams, promises, and a life that had taken a different path. He reached for the frame and traced the edge with his thumb. A soft knock interrupted the silence. His executive assistant entered carrying several folders. She paused when she noticed the photograph. "I have never seen that picture before," she said. Jonathan offered a faint smile. Most people have not. After she left, the office grew quiet once more. Jonathan turned his chair toward the city skyline. For the first time in years, he wondered whether protecting himself from old pain had also prevented new happiness from entering his life. Across town, Maya finished her shift and boarded a subway train home. The evening crowd filled the car with tired faces and half-finished conversations. She found a seat near the window and opened a small notebook she carried everywhere. Inside were lists of expenses, reminders, and simple goals she hoped to accomplish one day. Near the back of the notebook was a sentence she had written years earlier. "Never stop believing that life can surprise you." The words always made her smile. The next morning, Jonathan arrived at the building earlier than usual. Sunlight streamed through the enormous glass windows, painting the lobby in warm gold. Maya was watering plants near the entrance. For a moment, he watched quietly. Then something unexpected happened. He walked toward her without a reason prepared in advance. "Good morning," he said. Maya looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." Jonathan glanced at the flowers, then at the plants, then back at her. It was a completely ordinary moment. Yet after 25 years of emotional distance, even an ordinary conversation felt unfamiliar. "I never thanked you properly for finding that photograph," he said. Maya tilted her head slightly. "Some memories deserve to be found." Jonathan looked at her for a long second. Then, for the first time in many years, he felt the walls around his heart shift ever so slightly. The following days brought a subtle change that everyone in Reed Tower noticed, even if nobody could explain it. Jonathan Reed was still the same disciplined businessman who arrived before most employees and left long after sunset. He still attended meetings, reviewed contracts, and managed an empire worth billions of dollars. Yet something in his demeanor had softened. The sharp distance that once surrounded him seemed less absolute. Employees found him lingering in the lobby a little longer than necessary. Residents occasionally caught him observing the flower arrangements near the reception desk. More than once, people noticed him speaking with Maya Brooks. The conversations were never long. A few minutes here, a brief exchange there. Yet each interaction left Jonathan carrying an unfamiliar feeling back to his office. One Tuesday morning, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the lobby while Maya carefully arranged fresh yellow roses inside a large crystal vase. Jonathan paused beside the display. "You always choose different flowers," he observed. Maya smiled. "People notice flowers more when they change." Jonathan studied the arrangement. "I never paid attention before." Maya adjusted a stem. "Sometimes we stop noticing beautiful things when we see them every day." Her answer followed him throughout the morning. During a board meeting later that afternoon, while executives debated development plans and investment strategies, Jonathan found himself thinking about her words instead of profit margins. How many beautiful things had he stopped noticing? How many years had passed while he focused exclusively on work? That evening, as Manhattan glowed beneath a clear spring sky, Jonathan walked through his penthouse carrying a cup of coffee. The silence remained exactly as it always had. Yet now he noticed it differently. The quiet rooms no longer felt peaceful. They felt empty. Across town, Maya finished another shift and stopped at a neighborhood grocery store before heading home. As she compared prices in one aisle, an elderly customer accidentally dropped several items from her basket. Before anyone else reacted, Maya knelt to help gather everything. She spent several minutes assisting the woman and carrying the groceries to her car. The interaction seemed ordinary to Maya. Kindness often did. The next morning, Jonathan entered the lobby and overheard two residents discussing what had happened. They spoke about Maya's generosity with genuine admiration. Jonathan listened quietly. It confirmed something he had already suspected. Maya treated everyone with the same care. Not because she expected recognition, because it was simply who she was. Later that week, a heavy rainstorm swept across New York. Strong winds rattled windows throughout the city while dark clouds covered the skyline. Most people hurried indoors. Near closing time, Jonathan was leaving the building when he noticed Maya standing beneath the entrance canopy. She was waiting for the rain to ease before walking to the subway station. Without thinking, he stopped beside her. Together they watched water stream down the sidewalk. "Looks like the city has disappeared," Maya said. Jonathan looked toward the gray curtain of rain covering the streets. Maybe it needed a day off. Maya laughed softly. The sound was warm and effortless. For a moment, Jonathan laughed too. A genuine laugh. Not the polite kind used during business dinners. Not the controlled version reserved for public appearances. A real laugh. The security guard near the entrance looked over in surprise. He had worked in the building for 8 years and could not remember hearing Jonathan Reed laugh like that. Neither could Jonathan. As the rain continued falling around them, Maya glanced at him with quiet curiosity. "You should do that more often," she said. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" Maya smiled. "Smile." For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Jonathan realized something that startled him more than he expected. He could not remember the last person who cared whether he was happy. After that rainy evening beneath the entrance canopy, something quietly shifted between Jonathan Reed and Maya Brooks. Neither of them spoke about it. There was no dramatic moment, no grand realization. Yet the simple conversations that once lasted seconds gradually stretched into minutes. Jonathan began arriving a little earlier each morning. Maya noticed but never mentioned it. Instead, she greeted him with the same warmth she offered everyone else. Somehow, that made their interactions feel even more genuine. One Friday morning, sunlight poured through the lobby windows while Maya arranged fresh white orchids near the reception desk. Jonathan stopped beside her carrying a cup of coffee. "You seem to know exactly which flowers belong in each season," he said. Maya smiled as she adjusted a blossom. "Flowers are a little like people. They all need different things to thrive." Jonathan glanced toward the orchids. "And what do these need?" Maya laughed softly. "Patience. They bloom when they are ready." The answer lingered in his thoughts long after he stepped into the elevator. Later that afternoon, Jonathan found himself distracted during an executive meeting. A presentation filled the large screen at the front of the conference room while company directors discussed expansion plans. Usually, he absorbed every detail. Today, his attention drifted. He was thinking about patience, about blooming when ready, about how strange it felt to enjoy something as simple as a conversation. When the meeting finally ended, he walked toward the private elevator and paused. For years, his life had revolved around accomplishments. Every goal led to another goal. Every success created another challenge. Yet recently, the moments he remembered most were not business victories. They were ordinary exchanges in a lobby filled with flowers. Meanwhile, Maya spent her weekend volunteering at a neighborhood community center. She helped organize donated clothing, prepared meals, and spent time with local families who needed support. She never spoke about these activities at work because she did not do them for recognition. To Maya, helping people was simply part of being human. On Monday morning, Jonathan discovered this entirely by accident. As he entered the building, he overheard two residents discussing a charity event held over the weekend. Maya's name came up several times. One resident described how she had spent nearly her entire Saturday helping coordinate supplies for dozens of families. Jonathan slowed his pace. The information surprised him, not because he doubted Maya's kindness, because she had never mentioned it. Most people talked about their good deeds. Maya quietly lived hers. That afternoon, curiosity led Jonathan to ask a simple question. He found Maya organizing supplies in a maintenance room near the lobby. "Someone told me about the community center," he said. Maya looked up. "Oh." Her reaction was almost embarrassed. "It is not a big deal." Jonathan leaned against the doorway. "Helping people rarely is." Maya smiled but changed the subject immediately. The response fascinated him. She never seemed interested in drawing attention to herself. For a man surrounded by people constantly seeking influence, status, and recognition, that quality felt increasingly rare. Before leaving, Jonathan noticed a worn photograph pinned inside her locker. It showed Maya standing beside a young woman in a graduation gown. Pride radiated from both of them. Maya followed his gaze and smiled. "My daughter." Jonathan looked at the picture. "She looks happy." Maya's eyes softened. "She worked very hard to get there." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jonathan realized something unexpected. Maya was not extraordinary because of what she had overcome. She was extraordinary because despite everything life had asked of her, she still chose kindness every single day. As he walked away, he found himself wondering how many remarkable people existed in the world unnoticed. And for the first time in many years, Jonathan Reed felt grateful that one of them had crossed his path. Autumn arrived in New York with crisp mornings and golden leaves drifting between the skyscrapers. Reed Tower remained as elegant as ever, but whispers had begun circulating through its hallways. They started quietly, almost harmlessly. A receptionist noticed how often Jonathan paused to speak with Maya. A building manager mentioned that the owner seemed happier lately. A resident joked that the billionaire spent more time in the lobby than in his executive office. None of the comments were cruel. Yet together they formed something larger. Rumors. Maya became aware of them before Jonathan did. One afternoon, while organizing supplies in a storage room, she overheard two employees discussing her. They lowered their voices when they noticed she was nearby, but the meaning was already clear. Maya remained calm. She finished her work exactly as she always did. Yet later that evening, as she rode the subway home, the conversation lingered in her thoughts. She had spent her entire life earning respect through hard work and integrity. The last thing she wanted was to become the subject of speculation. The following morning, Jonathan entered the lobby carrying his usual coffee. He immediately sensed something different. Maya greeted him warmly, but there was a slight distance in her smile. Not coldness, caution. The difference was subtle, yet impossible for him to miss. "Everything all right?" he asked. Maya adjusted a stack of folders before answering. "Of course." Jonathan studied her expression. "You know, that answer usually means the opposite." A small laugh escaped her, but it faded quickly. "Sometimes people talk too much." Jonathan frowned slightly. "About what?" Maya hesitated. She disliked conflict and rarely complained. Yet she also believed in honesty. "About us." The words settled between them. Jonathan glanced around the lobby. Several employees immediately looked away. Understanding dawned across his face. For a moment he seemed almost amused. Then the amusement disappeared. "Does it bother you?" he asked. Maya took a slow breath. "Not for me. For you." Jonathan looked genuinely surprised. "For me?" Maya nodded. "People see a successful businessman and a cleaning employee. They make assumptions. They tell stories." Jonathan remained silent. Maya lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. "You have worked hard to build your reputation. I would never want to create problems for you." Something shifted in Jonathan's expression. Over the years, countless people had approached him seeking advantages, opportunities, or attention. Maya was worried about protecting him. The realization touched him more deeply than he expected. "My reputation survived real estate crashes, market downturns, and 25 years of board meetings," he said softly. "I think it can survive a few conversations in a lobby." Maya smiled despite herself. Yet after Jonathan left, the concern remained. Later that week, the situation became more complicated. Jonathan attended a private dinner with several longtime business associates. During the evening, one of them casually mentioned Maya. The comment was followed by a few knowing smiles around the table. Jonathan immediately understood what they were implying. Normally, he ignored gossip. This time he did not. He set down his glass and calmly changed the direction of the conversation. The room grew noticeably quieter. On his drive home, Jonathan stared out the window at the city lights passing by. For years, he had allowed distance to protect him from disappointment. Now, for the first time in decades, he found himself worried about losing a friendship that had become unexpectedly important. And deep down, that realization frightened him far more than any rumor ever could. The rumors did not disappear. If anything, they became more persistent as the weeks passed. Maya learned to ignore most of them, but ignoring something did not mean it stopped hurting. Every whispered conversation reminded her that some people would never see beyond job titles, income levels, or social status. To them, she would always be the cleaner, and Jonathan Reed would always be the billionaire. Nothing else seemed to matter. One cold November evening, Maya finished her shift later than usual. The lobby was nearly empty. Outside, the city shimmered beneath thousands of lights while a sharp wind swept through the streets. She stood alone near the reception desk, looking at the flowers she had arranged that morning. For a long moment, she simply stared at them. Then she made a decision she had been avoiding for weeks. The following morning, Jonathan arrived at the building carrying his usual coffee. He immediately sensed something was wrong. Maya was not near the flowers. She was not organizing supplies. She was not greeting residents with her familiar smile. Instead, the building manager approached him with an uneasy expression. "Mr. Reed, Maya asked me to give this to you." Jonathan looked down at the envelope being offered. His name was written neatly across the front. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Without a word, he took the envelope and walked toward his private office. The city skyline stretched beyond the windows as he sat behind his desk and carefully opened the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. "Dear Jonathan, I never imagined I would be writing this. Meeting you has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. Your friendship reminded me that kindness can exist in unexpected places. But sometimes caring about someone means stepping away before they are hurt. The attention surrounding us has become something I can no longer ignore. I know you say it does not matter, but it matters to me. You have worked too hard to build the life you deserve. I do not want to become a complication inside it. By the time you read this, I will have resigned from my position. Please do not think of this as goodbye. Think of it as gratitude. Thank you for every conversation, every smile, every reminder that life can still surprise us. Maya. Jonathan lowered the letter slowly. For several seconds, he simply stared at the page. Then he read it again and again. The office suddenly felt impossibly quiet, larger than before, emptier than before. The familiar silence he had lived with for 25 years returned all at once. Only now it felt unbearable. He stood and walked toward the window overlooking Manhattan. Below him, millions of people moved through their lives. Yet the only person he could think about was the woman who had quietly walked out of his. Later that afternoon, he visited the lobby himself. The flowers were still there, perfectly arranged. But Maya was gone. Her cleaning cart was gone. The warmth she brought into the building seemed to have vanished with her. For the first time in decades, Jonathan understood something that success could never teach. Loneliness was not the absence of people. It was the absence of one person who mattered. As evening settled over New York, Jonathan unfolded Maya's letter one more time. His eyes stopped on a single sentence. Meeting you has been one of the greatest gifts of my life. In that moment, Jonathan Reed realized what frightened him most was not growing older. It was allowing the most important person he had met in 25 years to disappear without a fight. The next morning, Jonathan Reed canceled 3 meetings for the first time in nearly a decade. His executive assistant stared at the revised schedule in disbelief. Investors could wait. Directors could wait. Contracts could wait. There was only one thing Jonathan could think about: Maya Brooks. The letter remained folded inside his jacket pocket as he left Reed Tower and stepped into the cold Manhattan air. The city moved around him in its usual rush, but for once, he was not focused on deadlines or business opportunities. He was focused on a woman who had quietly changed his life simply by being herself. After several phone calls and conversations with building staff, Jonathan finally learned where Maya had been volunteering on weekends. It was a modest community center in Brooklyn, tucked between a neighborhood library and a small grocery store. Nothing about the building was impressive. The paint was faded in places. The sign above the entrance was simple. Yet as Jonathan stepped inside, he immediately felt something his penthouse had not offered in years. Warmth. Laughter drifted through the hallways. Children worked on art projects at folding tables. Volunteers organized donated supplies. People greeted one another by name. Near the back of the room, Maya stood beside a group of families, helping distribute winter coats. For a moment, Jonathan simply watched. She moved through the room exactly as she had moved through the lobby of Reed Tower. Calm, kind, present. She made every person feel seen. Maya looked up and froze. Surprise filled her eyes. Jonathan, he smiled softly. I hope you do not mind that I came. Maya stepped away from the crowd and joined him near the entrance. How did you find me? You underestimate how resourceful a real estate developer can be. For the first time in days, she laughed. The sound brought immediate relief to his heart. Yet the smile faded quickly. You should not be here, she said gently. Jonathan nodded. That seems to be everyone's favorite advice lately. Maya looked away. I meant it, Jonathan. He studied her expression. The concern was genuine. Not for herself. For him. Once again, she was trying to protect him. Why? He asked quietly. Maya hesitated. Because your world and mine are different. Jonathan glanced around the community center. I know. People talk. I know that too. Maya folded her arms. Then why are you here? The question lingered between them. Jonathan reached into his jacket and removed her letter. The folded paper had traveled everywhere with him since he received it. Because for 25 years, I convinced myself that being alone was easier. His voice remained calm, but every word carried truth. Then you walked into my life and reminded me that happiness is not something you build. It is something you share. Maya's eyes softened. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Around them, life continued. Children laughed. Volunteers carried boxes. Someone played quiet music from a nearby speaker. Ordinary moments filled the room. Jonathan looked around and smiled. Do you know what I see here? Maya shook her head. I see a woman who improves every place she enters. Emotion flickered across her face. Jonathan continued. The lobby felt brighter because of you. My mornings felt better because of you. My life feels different because of you. Maya blinked rapidly and looked away. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was honest. Finally, Jonathan offered a small smile. For once, I am not choosing what is easiest. I am choosing what matters. And standing in that modest community center, Maya realized that the man who had spent 25 years protecting his heart was finally brave enough to open it. Winter arrived quietly in New York, covering rooftops with a light dusting of snow and turning the city into a landscape of silver and gold. Several months had passed since Jonathan Reed walked into that community center and chose honesty over fear. Life had not become perfect overnight. There were still curious looks. There were still assumptions. There were still people who struggled to understand how a billionaire and a former cleaning employee could belong in the same story. But something remarkable happened. The opinions that once seemed so powerful gradually became irrelevant, because the people who mattered most had already made their choice. On a clear December evening, Jonathan stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse and watched the city lights shimmer beneath the night sky. For years he had stood in this exact spot, feeling disconnected from the world below. Tonight felt different. The silence was gone. Soft music drifted through the room. Fresh flowers brightened the dining table. Laughter echoed from the kitchen. For the first time in 25 years, the penthouse felt like a home. Maya stepped into the living room, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Jonathan smiled the moment he saw her. It was still his favorite part of every day. Maya handed him a mug and joined him by the window. Together, they watched snowflakes drift between the skyscrapers. Neither spoke for a moment. They did not need to. Some forms of happiness arrived without words. A week later, Jonathan hosted a small gathering on the rooftop garden of Reed Tower. There were no reporters, no business announcements, no elaborate decorations. Only family members, close friends, and a handful of people who had become important parts of their lives. The same rooftop that once overlooked a city filled with strangers now overlooked a future filled with possibility. Maya's daughter stood nearby, smiling proudly. Several employees from the building attended as well. Even the security guard who had watched Jonathan's transformation unfold over the past year could hardly believe the difference. The man who once avoided conversations now spent most of the evening laughing. As the sun began setting beyond the Manhattan skyline, the city glowed beneath shades of orange and gold. The familiar towers reflected the fading light, while a gentle winter breeze moved through the rooftop garden. Jonathan looked around at the people gathered there and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Gratitude. Not for success, not for wealth, for connection, for belonging, for a second chance he never expected to receive. Maya stepped beside him and followed his gaze toward the horizon. Beautiful, isn't it? She asked softly. Jonathan nodded. It is. Then he looked at her. But not as beautiful as the life you brought back into mine. Maya smiled, her eyes shining with quiet emotion. The years of loneliness no longer defined him. The labels that once separated them no longer mattered. What remained was something far simpler and far stronger. Respect, friendship, love. As the last light of day settled across the city, Jonathan realized he had spent 25 years searching for peace in accomplishments, buildings, and achievements. He finally found it in a conversation beside a flower arrangement, in a woman who treated every person with kindness, in someone who reminded him that happiness was never about what you owned. It was about who you shared your life with. And as he stood beside Maya watching the sunset paint the sky above New York, Jonathan Reed knew one thing with complete certainty. Sometimes the greatest chapters of life begin long after you think the story is over.